Hey everyone! Tonight, we're stepping into the shadows of history, into a world that existed beneath castles, behind fortress walls, and deep within the forgotten corners of medieval cities. We're exploring the hidden world of medieval prisons, places that most people never saw, never spoke about, and desperately hoped never to experience. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Close your eyes and imagine walking through a medieval city at dusk. The streets are narrow, winding between timber-framed buildings. Church bells ring in the distance. Everything seems peaceful. But beneath this surface exists an entirely different world, a world of stone chambers, iron gates, and human beings removed from society, hidden where most will never see them. This is the hidden world of medieval prisons, and it operated according to rules most people never understood. The very concept of a hidden prison reveals something profound about medieval society. Unlike modern prisons, these institutions were deliberately obscure. They weren't meant to be seen or understood. They were meant to make people disappear. The White Tower of London, constructed in 1066, had basement chambers specifically designed for holding prisoners. These spaces were carved from living rock, with entrances following deliberate patterns of disorientation. Spiral staircases turned right, forcing escaping prisoners to expose their unshielded side. Steps were unevenly spaced, making climbing in darkness nearly impossible. Ceiling heights decreased with each level until you could no longer stand upright. This progressive compression was psychological architecture designed to crush the spirit before the body. Some prisons didn't look like prisons at all. The Clink in London was incorporated into the Bishop of Winchester's palace. From the street, it appeared respectable. Passers-by had no idea that behind those walls, people languished in conditions that would break them. The Venetians perfected concealment. Below the famous Bridge of Sighs lay the pozzi, the wells, cells built below sea level. Water seeped constantly through porous stone. During high tides, water might cover floors to ankle depth. Prisoners learned to sleep on stone ledges, keeping belongings above the waterline. The sound of water was constant, dripping, flowing, occasionally rushing during storms. These hidden spaces existed in permanent twilight. Natural light rarely penetrated. Air circulation was minimal. Temperature remained constant, perpetually cold in northern climates, oppressively warm in southern ones. Without sun to mark days or seasons to provide reference, prisoners lost connection to normal time. Roger Mortimer, imprisoned in the Tower in 1322, later described his captivity as existing outside time's measure. He couldn't say whether he'd been imprisoned for months or years. Darkness had swallowed chronology itself. Moisture was constant. This perpetual humidity made cold feel colder, penetrating everything. At Chateau Gallard, engineers discovered during renovations that drainage channels had been deliberately designed to direct water toward cells rather than away. This wasn't incompetence, it was malice rendered in stone. In coastal prisons, cells flooded with tides. At Mont Saint-Michel, the lowest cells flooded completely during spring tides. Prisoners survived by clinging to iron rings set high in walls, legs submerged in freezing seawater. By the 12th and 13th centuries, a sophisticated network of hidden prisons had developed across Europe. These weren't coordinated, but they shared common features: concealment, security, and operation outside public view. Medieval engineers developed sophisticated techniques. One approach was building prisons into foundations of larger structures. Dover Castle's chambers were carved from solid chalk cliffs, escape-proof and invisible from outside. Another technique repurposed existing underground spaces, old cisterns, natural caves, abandoned wells. Beneath Edinburgh, vaults built to support the South Bridge became improvised prisons, their isolation making them perfect for holding people when official facilities overflowed. The most sophisticated prisons incorporated multiple security layers. A prisoner might face 6 separate locked doors, each requiring a different key held by a different official. The Tower of London exemplified this, even obtaining one key meant facing multiple additional barriers. Ventilation shafts were too small to climb through but allowed some air circulation. At Château de Laux, shafts made 690-degree turns before reaching the surface, providing air but making communication impossible. These same shafts could be weaponized, blocked to suffocate prisoners or used to introduce smoke and sewage. The architecture was an architecture of absence, spaces designed to negate human presence rather than accommodate it. Cells were small, often barely large enough to lie down. Chillingham Castle's cell measures 5 feet by 7 feet, with a 5 feet 3 inches ceiling. An average person could neither stand upright nor lie diagonally. This prevented exercise, caused muscles to atrophy, and created constant discomfort that became torture without any active participation from jailers. Cells were dark. One chamber in Beauvais Cathedral received light through a gap so narrow that noon sunlight penetrated for exactly 12 minutes per day. For nearly 24 hours, prisoners existed in absolute darkness. Without light, circadian rhythms collapse. Depression deepens. Hallucinations become common. They were isolated. Cells at Vincennes Castle were separated by layers of stone, earth, and lead that absorbed sound so effectively that screaming would be inaudible in the next cell. And they were permanent, built to last centuries. Mortar was often mixed with crushed iron or lead, making it harder than the stones themselves. These prisons were investments in the infrastructure of concealment. The oubliette, literally, the forgotten place, was perhaps the most terrifying design. Warwick Castle's oubliette is a bottle-shaped chamber carved into bedrock. The only entrance is through a circular opening in the ceiling, barely wide enough for a body. Once lowered inside, prisoners found themselves in complete darkness, standing in whatever had accumulated at the bottom: water, waste, remains of previous occupants. The chamber widened below the entrance, making escape impossible. Even if you could reach the opening above, your shoulders couldn't compress enough to pass through the narrow neck. This was architecture at its cruelest, every element serving the dual purpose of confinement and psychological destruction. Unlike modern prisons with uniforms, medieval prisoners wore whatever they had on when arrested. This clothing became a frozen moment from their previous life, gradually deteriorating as imprisonment continued. For wealthy prisoners, fine fabrics and elaborate garments slowly fell apart in damp conditions. A nobleman in silk and velvet watched these expensive items literally rot off his body, the contrast between quality and degradation becoming a visible metaphor for their fall from grace. For poor prisoners, rough wool or linen quickly became rags. The deterioration marked time's passage viscerally. You measured imprisonment by your garments, spreading holes, fraying seams, accumulating stains. After 6 months, you might have barely enough fabric for modesty. The symbolism was profound. In medieval society, clothing marked status and identity. Stripped of proper attire or watching it deteriorate, prisoners lost visible identity. In darkness, a nobleman in rags was indistinguishable from a peasant. Social hierarchies dissolved. Some tried maintaining their clothing, washing in contaminated water, attempting repairs with salvaged threads. These efforts were usually futile, but the effort itself was significant. By trying to maintain clothing, prisoners resisted the system's attempt to reduce them to mere bodies. Food was minimal and irregular. The basic ration was bread and water, but the quality varied enormously. Bread might be made from maslin, a coarse wheat-rye mixture, or from inferior grains like barley, oats, or peas. Sometimes it was stretched with sawdust or ground bark. The bread might be literally green with mold. Ergot fungus on rye caused hallucinations, convulsions, and gangrene. Prisoners eating contaminated bread experienced St. Anthony's fire, burning sensations, convulsions, gangrenous limbs. Hallucinations added to the horror. Imagine being confined in darkness, starving, watching your body decay, then seeing visions of demons. Water was drawn from wells, cisterns, or collected rainwater, its quality unpredictable and often dangerous. Contaminated water caused dysentery, typhoid, and cholera. Without adequate water to replace what was lost, prisoners died quickly. Food delivery was irregular, sometimes twice daily, sometimes not for days. This unpredictability created constant anxiety and made establishing routine impossible. You had to eat immediately because rats would steal anything left unguarded and you didn't know when more would come. Some prisons expected prisoners to pay for their own food. Jailers would provide minimal free rations, but anything beyond that required purchase. This created a two-tier system where wealthy prisoners maintained adequate nutrition while poor prisoners starved. Families sent money hoping it would buy food, but jailers often pocketed most of it. Records from Fleet Prison show Sir Robert Wingfield's family sent over £40 during 3 years. The jailer claimed all went to provisions, but Sir Robert reported actual provisions worth perhaps £5. The remaining £35 disappeared. Chronic hunger became defining. It weakened bodies, clouded minds, caused obsession with food. It consumed muscle tissue, including heart muscle. Vitamin deficiencies caused scurvy, night blindness, beriberi, slow killers taking months to develop full effects. Daily life was characterized by monotony and uncertainty. Each day was identical, yet each brought the possibility of sudden change, a trial, transfer, release, or execution. Prisoners had no activities beyond basic survival. They simply existed, waiting. Without external reference points, temporal awareness dissolved. Some tried maintaining routines, exercises, prayers, mental games. This required enormous willpower when every aspect of the environment conspired to crush initiative. Exercise might consist of standing and sitting repeatedly. Mental exercises involved reciting memorized texts, solving problems, reconstructing maps from memory. Others gave up, sinking into stupor, sitting motionless for hours, minds retreating from unbearable reality. Catatonia was common. Some prisoners eventually died in these positions, having willed themselves out of existence. The hidden nature meant no contact with the outside world except through jailers. They couldn't see the sky, hear city sounds, or receive news. This sensory isolation was devastating. The world continued without them, and they had no way of knowing what was happening, families thriving or starving, political causes won or lost, kings died and replaced. The psychological impact was devastating beyond physical torture. Unlike prisoners in visible institutions who might receive visits or maintain some connection to the outside world, those in hidden prisons experienced a unique form of social death. They were removed so completely they might as well have ceased to exist. Family might believe them dead. Property was confiscated. Names were forgotten. They became ghosts while living, present in body but absent from the social world. This erasure created extreme psychological distress. Humans define themselves through relationships. When those are severed completely, when there are no interactions except with jailers treating you as subhuman, your sense of self fragments. You question your own existence. Am I still who I was? Does anyone remember me? Do I still exist? Some coped by creating internal worlds, inventing companions, having conversations with imaginary people, constructing fantasies about life after release. One 15th-century prisoner in the Bastille spent 3 years in conversation with what he believed was Thomas Becket's ghost, discussing theology and justice. Others retreated into religion. Prayer maintained a relationship with God that couldn't be severed by imprisonment. For many, religious devotion prevented complete psychological collapse. Faith provided a framework for understanding suffering as meaningful, a test, an opportunity for spiritual growth, penance for sins. But faith could intensify suffering. If you believed imprisonment was God's punishment, you felt the full weight of divine condemnation. If you believed you were being tested but began failing, you might feel you were damning yourself eternally. The economy of hidden prisons operated outside normal channels and legal oversight. Everything had a price, arbitrary and constantly changing based on jailers' assessment of what prisoners could pay and their desperation. Prisoners or families paid for better treatment, better food, cleaner water, a blanket, removal of chains, a cell with more light, or simply being left alone. This system created perverse incentives. Jailers wanted prisoners imprisoned as long as possible to maximize payments. They wanted prisoners uncomfortable enough to pay for improvements, but not so miserable they died quickly. The hidden nature made this exploitation largely invisible. Even when authorities knew, they often tolerated it because it meant not paying jailers adequate wages. The system was self-funding. Prisoners with no money received minimal rations, no improvements, and were often abused. Many died within months. Jailers charged for everything. Chains came with rental fees, straw cost money, space was billed like rent, even water was charged as an amenity. Upon release, prisoners were presented with a bill and couldn't leave until it was paid. Even innocent prisoners acquitted at trial might spend additional years in prison because they couldn't afford jail fees. Records from Newgate Prison show numerous prisoners who were acquitted but remained in prison for months or years afterward, unable to pay fees. Some eventually died in custody, awaiting release they'd legally earned but couldn't purchase. Warfare and politics were primary drivers of hidden imprisonment. High-value prisoners, captured nobles, enemy commanders, political rivals, were particularly likely to be held in hidden locations where they could be kept secure and out of public view. The hidden nature served crucial functions, preventing supporters from knowing where prisoners were held, making rescue impossible, allowing authorities to deny holding prisoners at all if politically convenient, and creating uncertainty among potential opponents. Some political prisoners were held for decades, becoming forgotten men whose existence was known only to a small circle. When political circumstances changed, these prisoners might suddenly be released, emerging like ghosts from another era, unable to adjust. The Man in the Iron Mask illustrates the extremes. The real prisoner was held from 1669 until 1703, always masked to prevent recognition, moved between hidden locations. This represents hidden imprisonment at its most complete, not just removing someone from society, but erasing their very identity. King John of England was particularly enthusiastic about using hidden imprisonment. He held numerous rivals in various castles, often moving them to prevent rescue. His cruelty became legendary. One account describes 22 knights at Corfe Castle supposedly starved to death on John's orders. The secret nature created opportunities for abuse beyond even harsh medieval norms. Without oversight or public knowledge, authorities could do whatever they wanted. Some prisoners were harshly interrogated. Others were simply forgotten. Still others were quietly executed, deaths never recorded, bodies disposed of without ceremony. Edward II, after being deposed in 1327, was imprisoned at Berkeley Castle where he was murdered. The official story claimed natural causes, but the actual method was reportedly chosen because it would leave no external marks. Maintaining hidden prisons required careful coordination. Supplies had to be delivered without drawing attention. Jailers had to be paid and supervised while maintaining secrecy. Records had to be kept or deliberately not kept depending on desired secrecy. Supply chains were deliberately obscure. Food might be purchased from multiple sources to avoid patterns revealing the prison's location. Chains and locks might be manufactured in one location and delivered to another, with the final destination kept secret even from craftsmen. This compartmentalization was intentional. No single person outside the inner circle should know all details. This made the system more secure but harder to manage. Jailers were carefully selected for loyalty and discretion. They had to be trustworthy enough to keep secrets but ruthless enough to maintain control without supervision. Many were former soldiers or men with criminal backgrounds. They were paid well for their silence. Record keeping was minimal and deliberately vague. Official records might note secure custody without specifying location. Transfer records might use code names instead of actual names. Some prisoners were never officially recorded, they simply disappeared without documentation. This deliberate obscurity served multiple purposes but also means we'll never know the full extent of hidden imprisonment. We know about prisoners eventually released or who left traces in records. But how many died without anyone knowing they'd been imprisoned? Because these places were hidden, they became subjects of wild speculation and dark legends. Stories circulated about what happened in castle depths, often incorporating supernatural elements that made prisons seem even more horrifying. One common belief was that hidden prisons were haunted by spirits of prisoners who died there. Jailers and guards reported unexplained sounds, shadowy figures, cold spots. Whether these were genuine phenomena, guilty consciences, or misinterpreted natural sounds is impossible to determine, but they were widely believed. The Tower of London has more ghost stories than perhaps any other British building. Anne Boleyn was said to walk corridors carrying her severed head. The princes in the tower haunted rooms where they were last seen alive. These stories served multiple functions, reinforcing the tower's reputation as a place of terror, providing explanations for unexplained experiences, and offering a form of justice, suggesting that those wrongly imprisoned could achieve some posthumous presence, even if only as ghosts. Other prisons were associated with demons rather than human ghosts. The belief was that places of such concentrated suffering attracted malevolent entities. These beings supposedly tormented prisoners, appearing at night, whispering terrible things, driving them to madness. These folkloric elements reveal how medieval people processed the reality of hidden prisons. The actual conditions were so horrifying that supernatural explanations seemed necessary. The supernatural framework also provided moral accounting that legal systems failed to provide: ghosts haunting murderers, demons punishing the wicked, spirits bearing witness to injustice. The folklore also provided resistance. By creating narratives where prisoners' spirits haunted oppressors, common people asserted that injustice left marks that couldn't be hidden, that the powerful couldn't escape all consequences. Religion played a complex, often contradictory role. The Church officially advocated mercy toward prisoners. Visiting prisoners was a corporal work of mercy. Some religious orders made it their mission to provide spiritual comfort and material assistance. But the Church also operated its own hidden prisons, responsible for some of the most feared imprisonment systems in medieval Europe. Ecclesiastical courts sentenced people to imprisonment for religious offenses, often carried out in hidden dungeons beneath monasteries or bishops' palaces. This wasn't simple hypocrisy. It reflected fundamental tension between mercy and judgment, between forgiveness and the need to punish heresy. Church authorities believed imprisoning heretics was mercy because it gave them time to recant and save their souls. Temporal suffering was insignificant compared to eternal damnation. The Inquisition developed particularly sophisticated hidden prison systems designed not just to hold prisoners, but to break their will and extract confessions. The process was methodical and psychological: prisoners held in isolation, given minimal sustenance, subjected to intense questioning, all designed to create complete dependency and desperation. The hidden nature was essential to the Inquisition's function. If the public knew details, there might have been outcry. By keeping the process hidden, the Inquisition maintained an aura of mystery and fear that enhanced its power. Religious prisoners often found their faith tested profoundly. Some emerged with belief strengthened, convinced their suffering was divine testing. Others lost faith entirely, unable to reconcile their suffering with a benevolent deity. Still others developed new syncretic beliefs incorporating elements drawn from prison experiences. The practice of sanctuary provided a limited alternative. Churches could offer sanctuary to fugitives, protecting them from arrest for usually 40 days. During this time, fugitives were essentially imprisoned within church grounds but at least in a visible public space rather than hidden dungeons. The fact that sanctuary was so widely used suggests people viewed hidden imprisonment with such dread that they'd rather be confined in a church than risk hidden dungeons. The long-term consequences extended far beyond individual prisoners. These systems shaped medieval society, creating cultures of fear, secrecy, and arbitrary power that persisted for centuries. For families of disappeared prisoners, the hidden nature created unique anguish. They often didn't know where loved ones were, whether they were alive or dead, or what they could do. This uncertainty was in some ways worse than execution, which at least provided closure. Some families spent years searching, traveling city to city, bribing officials, following rumors that usually led nowhere. Most searches were fruitless. The system was designed to make people disappear completely. The economic impact was significant. When breadwinners disappeared, families fell into poverty. Businesses failed. Properties were confiscated. And because imprisonment was hidden, there was no official recognition, no compensation, no acknowledgement. Families existed in legal and social limbo. Spouses couldn't remarry because they couldn't prove death. They couldn't inherit property because legal status was unclear. This limbo could persist for decades. The psychological impact on society was profound. The knowledge that hidden prisons existed, that people could disappear without trace, created pervasive anxiety and distrust. People were careful about what they said. They avoided political discussions. They didn't challenge authority even when it was clearly unjust. The hidden prison system, though affecting relatively few people directly, shaped the behavior of entire populations. It was a mechanism through which rulers maintained control, not through constant visible repression, but through the ever-present possibility of disappearance. The legal legacy is complex but important. Many abuses that occurred, secret arrests, indefinite detention, lack of oversight, deliberate infliction of suffering, are now prohibited by law in most countries. The development of legal protections like habeas corpus, the right to no charges, the right to speedy trial, and prohibitions against cruel punishment can all be seen as reactions against hidden prison systems. Habeas corpus, enshrined in the Habeas Corpus Act of 1679, was specifically designed to prevent hidden imprisonment. It requires authorities to produce prisoners in court and justify their detention, making it impossible to simply hide people away indefinitely. But development of these protections was gradual and hard-fought. Authorities resisted limitations on their power to imprison, arguing that state security required holding dangerous individuals without public trial. The impulse to create hidden detention systems persists throughout history. Authorities have repeatedly tried to create spaces where normal rules don't apply. The medieval hidden prison is not just historical curiosity, it's a template used again and again from the Bastille to the gulags to Guantanamo Bay. The architectural legacy is still visible today. Visiting these sites reveals spaces designed to be seen only by victims and operators. Walking through them, you can still feel their original purpose: narrow corridors forcing single file, low ceilings making you stoop, thick walls muffling sound, darkness persisting even with modern lighting. Standing in a medieval dungeon, looking at iron rings where chains were attached, reading desperate inscriptions scratched into walls by long-dead prisoners, you're forced to confront what happened here. These weren't abstract historical events. They were experienced by real people who felt pain and fear and despair as intensely as we would. The cultural legacy appears throughout literature, folklore, and popular imagination. The idea of the secret dungeon, the hidden cell, the prisoner who disappears, these are recurring themes. They tap into deep fears about powerlessness, about being at the mercy of arbitrary authority, about losing your identity and connection to the world. The moral legacy is perhaps most important. These systems represented fundamental betrayal of human dignity and justice. They were based on the premise that some people could be removed from society, hidden away, treated as less than human without accountability. How did deeply religious societies that professed belief in human dignity tolerate hidden imprisonment? Part of the answer lies in concealment's effectiveness. What you don't see, you don't have to reckon with morally. The hidden nature allowed people to avoid confronting reality. Understanding hidden prisons teaches us that visibility matters. Transparency matters. Accountability matters. When we allow systems to operate in secret, when we accept that some things are better left hidden, that's when we create conditions for abuse and atrocity. The prisoners who suffered deserve to be remembered not as abstract facts, but as real people who endured unimaginable isolation and uncertainty. Every scratch on every wall, every tally mark, every desperate message, these are testaments to human beings who refuse to be completely erased. Their suffering was not meaningless. It teaches us about the importance of visibility, of refusing to accept that some things are better left hidden. It teaches us to ask questions about what happens in the shadows, to demand accountability, to insist that no one should be able to make people disappear without consequence. The hidden world of medieval prisons is no longer hidden. We've brought it into the light, examined it, understood it. And in doing so, we've taken away some of its power. Because the greatest weapon of hidden systems is secrecy. Once that secrecy is broken, once we know what happened and how, we can work to ensure it never happens again. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of history. If you found this valuable, please like and subscribe. And remember, the next time you walk through a medieval castle, think about what might lie beneath your feet. Think about the hidden spaces, the forgotten prisoners, the systems that operated in secret. And ask yourself, what hidden systems exist in our own time? And what are we doing to bring them into the light? Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and never accept that some things are better left hidden. The transportation of prisoners to and from hidden prisons was conducted with great secrecy and often with deliberate cruelty, designed to disorient and demoralize. This wasn't simply about moving a person from one location to another. It was a carefully orchestrated ritual of erasure, a process that began the psychological destruction even before the prisoner reached their final destination. Prisoners might be moved at night, hooded or blindfolded so they couldn't see where they were being taken. The hood itself was a powerful symbol and tool. Made of rough burlap or heavy wool, it restricted breathing, creating a sense of suffocation and panic. The prisoner couldn't see threats coming, couldn't anticipate turns or steps, couldn't orient themselves in space. Every moment became uncertain, frightening, disorienting. The journey itself became part of the punishment and a method of psychological control. They might be transported in closed wagons or carts that concealed them from public view, preventing any chance that sympathizers might see them and attempt rescue. These wagons were essentially mobile prisons, often nothing more than wooden boxes on wheels with no windows, no ventilation, and no room to sit comfortably. Inside these transport vehicles, prisoners endured conditions that were sometimes worse than their cells. Multiple prisoners might be crammed into a space designed for cargo, not human beings. In summer, the heat became stifling, the air thick and difficult to breathe. In winter, the cold penetrated through thin wooden walls, and prisoners had no way to warm themselves. The wagon would lurch and bounce over rough medieval roads, throwing prisoners against each other and the walls. Injuries were common, complaints were ignored. The routes taken were often deliberately circuitous, designed to confuse the prisoner about their actual destination and to make it difficult for anyone tracking them to determine where they were being taken. A journey that should have taken 2 days might be stretched to 5 or 6, with the wagon doubling back, taking unnecessary detours, stopping in forests or empty fields for hours before continuing. This wasn't inefficiency. It was strategy. The deliberate disorientation served multiple purposes, each carefully considered by those who designed these systems. A prisoner who didn't know where they were being held couldn't provide that information to potential rescuers, even if they somehow managed to get a message out. The journey itself, conducted in darkness and confusion, intensified the psychological stress of imprisonment. By the time they reached their destination, prisoners were already psychologically weakened, more malleable, less likely to resist. The guards who conducted these transfers were specially chosen for their discretion and their willingness to use violence if necessary. They were instructed to speak as little as possible, to provide no information about the destination or the route, to ignore all questions and pleas. This enforced silence was another form of psychological warfare. The prisoner was reduced to an object being moved, not a human being worthy of communication or explanation. During stops, prisoners might be taken from the wagon and left in temporary holding locations, abandoned buildings, remote barns, caves, or forests. These temporary stops added to the disorientation and fear. The prisoner never knew if they had reached their final destination or if this was merely another waypoint in an endless journey. They never knew if they would be put back in the wagon or if this remote location would become their tomb. Food and water during these transfers were minimal and irregular, continuing the deprivation that characterized imprisonment. A prisoner might receive a crust of bread and a dipper of water once a day, sometimes less. The thirst became overwhelming, especially during summer transports. The hunger gnawed constantly. But worse than the physical discomfort was the uncertainty about when or if the next meal would come. Some prisoners didn't survive these journeys. The combination of stress, deprivation, existing health problems, and the brutal conditions of transport proved fatal. Bodies would be disposed of quietly, buried in unmarked graves along the route or left in remote locations where they wouldn't be discovered. There was no record, no notification to families, no acknowledgement that these deaths had occurred. The prisoners simply disappeared, their fate unknown to anyone except the guards who had transported them. Richard II of England was transported to his imprisonment at Pontefract Castle in 1399 under conditions of extreme secrecy. He was moved at night, in disguise, along routes that were changed multiple times to prevent anyone from predicting his location. The once powerful king was reduced to a hooded figure in the back of a wagon, unrecognizable, unacknowledged, stripped of all the ceremony and respect that had surrounded him for his entire life. By the time he reached Pontefract, he had been so disoriented and demoralized that when he was eventually murdered there, he reportedly offered little resistance. The journey had broken something in him. The psychological impact of being transported like cargo, of not knowing where he was or where he was going, of being handled roughly by guards who had once bowed before him, this destruction of dignity and certainty had achieved what physical torture might not have. The transportation process also served as a demonstration of power for those who controlled it. The ability to move prisoners at will, to make them disappear from one location and reappear in another, to control every aspect of their journey, this demonstrated the absolute authority of those in charge. The prisoner had no agency, no choice, no control. They were completely at the mercy of a system that treated them as objects rather than people. For prisoners of high political value, the secrecy of transport was even more elaborate. Multiple decoy wagons might be sent in different directions. False information might be deliberately leaked about the route or destination. Guards might be told one thing while the actual plan was different. This compartmentalization of information meant that even those participating in the transport might not know the full plan. The arrival at the hidden prison was carefully managed to continue the disorientation. Prisoners might be brought in through side entrances or underground passages rather than main gates. They might be moved through a series of corridors and chambers before reaching their cell, each turn and passage further confusing their sense of location. By the time they were finally placed in their cell and the hood removed, they had no idea where they were in relation to the outside world. This disorientation was both practical and psychological. Practically, it prevented prisoners from mapping the prison's layout or planning escape routes. Psychologically, it created a sense of being lost in a maze, of being so deeply buried that finding the way out would be impossible even if the doors were unlocked. The transportation and transfer system was thus an integral part of the hidden prison apparatus. It wasn't just logistics. It was psychological warfare, a carefully designed process that began the destruction of identity and hope long before the cell door closed. The journey itself became part of the imprisonment, a liminal space where the prisoner was neither here nor there, neither free nor yet confined, but suspended in a state of terror and uncertainty that would mark them forever.